over the details of CO Executives in Transition because you know why you're here, and I think everybody's been here at least once to understand what we're doing. But we are heading into our third quarter and excited about some new things that we're bringing to you in the next couple months. But I did want to add one slide in here, and that is because I wanted to ask everybody, as you're going through this process with at least going through these sessions with us, to get back to us if you landed, because last week we had a couple people that reached out to us to share their story that they had landed a job. One was Terry Cannon, which a lot of you are familiar with, and Terry accepted a position that she'll be starting in April. So I was really excited to hear that from her, and just ask that you all share the same thing, because we'd like to share in that and celebrate in that with you. And that we would also like to, anybody who lands back into the operations, second in command CO role, to invite you to join us for 3 months at the CO Forum global meetings. We have great executive sessions and topics, and it's really great to get together with your peers. And as you're transitioning into a new role, I think you'd find great value in that. As you all know, meeting courtesy, everybody came in muted. I don't think you need to mute today. We're a smaller group, and I think Michael's going to keep you engaged throughout and be asking questions. So it's not as important today to mute unless you've got some background noise going on. If you have to step away, no problem. We operate business first. And Fiona is recording, so we'll have a recording later if for any reason you have to drop off. And like I said, questions, you could put any questions for Michael into the chat, or me or Fiona. But he'll be stopping to ask questions, and also we'll have some time at the end so we can have some discussion as well. Fiona is your go-to. If there's anything you need, just reach out to her. I'm always available, but she's a little more responsive. And with that, I'd like to introduce you to Michael. Bill and I met Michael, and he's certified in hypnosis and energy psychology. He worked in the IT industry for 30 years, and much of that time was spent in anxiety and panic. After encountering energy techniques that cleared his thinking, he realized that his old habitual thinking loops were the cause of his dilemmas, and not his boss, his relationships, or the pile of work that needed to be done. His thinking about those things was in fact the problem. With the realization that nothing needs to be done to fix thinking, he gained clarity and wisdom that propelled him into a successful coaching career, helping clients realize that they're already well, and at their core, teaching them how to access their innate mental clarity and wisdom. Everyone has access to mental clarity and wisdom. And once you realize this, you no longer get stuck in detrimental habits. And with that, I will stop and let Michael tell you a bit about himself and get started on this sharing and presentation.
Good morning. At least it's morning where I'm at. I'm so glad to be here with all of you. Thank you for the introduction. Very much. So today I'm going to be talking about stress, but the opposite of that is going to be coming to accessing your own internal wisdom. And what my experiences have been are just that habitual thinking that created the stress, that created a lot of other emotional distress that really got in my way. And when letting go of that stress, one of the big things that was so helpful to me was just coming into that clarity of thinking, of wisdom, of being in flow. And I think probably everybody here, I'm going to guess, has experienced being in flow. I'm going to give a little bit of a definition to that in the slides. So with that, I'm going to start my slides. Here we go. So again, I'm Michael Messmer. There's my contact information. And so this past year has been quite a trip. We've had the pandemic. My kids and I have made a joke about it. Not that it's not serious, but we call it pandemic, being in lockdown. There was the political upheaval. I don't think it matters what side of that you were on. It was a stressful year in politics. And that was in our news feeds, on our televisions, all over the place. And so that just ratcheted up the level of stress that we were encountering on a daily basis, not just internally, but externally. And then, of course, I know this group is in transition, and I put stressfully out of work, and you may be out of work, or you may be in a transition position while you're looking for your next COO position. So that transition is one of the things that we think can cause stress. Um, so you've probably been searching, making a lot of connections, working on creating your next COO position so that you can do what you do best, and live your best life. Because if you're a COO, I know that you are living from a place of service and passion. So let's just talk about some of these stress factors. And if anybody wants to type in the chat what has been stressing them out, that would be really great. I would appreciate hearing that from you. Laura and I had a conversation about that. And so here are just a few of the things that came up for me. I am looking to, can't find my chat button. All right, doesn't matter. So, that length of time to find your next position, that, could have been a month or 2 months, that starts to get stressful. I think for some folks, it's been a year. If you have lost your position or your position was eliminated due to the pandemic and you haven't found anything, that is really a big deal in terms of what you might see as very stressful. Maybe you have your resume ready. I've experienced this, having my resume ready and just discovering by talking to a professional resume writer that I had done it all wrong, according to them, and that I needed to change it around, fix it, change my wording, eliminate some things, add other things. It's like, well, I thought I had this right. And to hear that it was wrong, it doesn't feel good. If you've been out on interviews, if you've been close to getting that job, hearing that you were the second choice and that they've hired somebody else, that gets to a place where now you're starting to think about, am I good enough? Am I able to do this? Why didn't they pick me? What does this other person have that I don't? And all of these kinds of thoughts that get going in our minds while we're doing that. If you've been working from home or you've been trying to find a job from home and you have kids of any age who are home because of the lockdown, it's something to deal with. It's some other added thing that you can begin to feel stress about, especially if they're young kids that need your attention or help while they're navigating the online world of doing that. You might feel a loss of your identity. That can be hugely stressful. If you've been out of work for a while, you have been used to being in a position, and we identify with the positions that we're in often because we spend so much time at it, that just having that moment of, wow, it's been so long, can I do this anymore? Who am I now that I'm not working? Will I be able to work again? And that loss of identity can elevate the stress level. Perhaps your financial safety net is running low. And if your financial safety net is running low, I get it. I've been there. It's like, I've got to find anything at this point. I've got to start to replenish that, or at least slow down it going out. You have a lot of stressful thoughts about that. And of course, you may or may not take action on it, depending on where you're at in your search or how close you are. But nonetheless, there is that thought process that comes up that says, if this doesn't come through, I'm going to be stuck. Or if I don't find something soon, I'm going to be stuck. It totally strains the family dynamic. There we go. And when that dynamic gets strained, then everybody else is stressed. And it begins to play off of one another between spouses, between parents and children. And it's really good just to step back and see everybody for who they are in the family and find a place where you can feel reassured and you can be reassuring to the others. I might have mentioned this a few moments ago, but just that thought that something's wrong with me. I haven't found a position. Maybe I'm not able to do it anymore. Maybe there's something wrong with me. Maybe I should find something else to do. Maybe I'll never find a position. That sort of thing gets going, and it can show up in a number of ways. That something is wrong with me can show up in sentences like, you'll hear this in your mind, I'll never find another position, or nobody really wants me, or I'm not good enough. All of those things can show up, and it's really stuff that's not true. I want to assure you that these are just thoughts in your head. And I'm going to talk more about that because those thoughts are really actually not your fault. So I know when we talk about these things, we can feel blamed, even if it's just you thinking about it to yourself. You can feel like you're blaming yourself. And that adds to the stress levels. And if you know anything about stress, there's a part of the brain, the amygdala, that fires up and shoots out cortisol, and you get into the fight or flight mode. I'm probably repeating everything you already know about this, but that fight or flight mode puts us on high alert, and we stop having access to the things we need to be in a peaceful place, in a place of productivity, in a place where we can use what we have available to us, our own internal resources that will propel us forward. So stress creates a barrier to ease and flow. So what does being in flow mean? If you haven't run into this, and I've listened to a lot of podcasts where people talk about being in flow. In fact, I love listening to podcasts where people talk about that. Positive psychologist Mihaly, I can't say his last name, I hope you can, describes flow as a state of complete immersion in activity. And that's a place that is often found when we're doing something that's enjoyable, whether it's solving a problem, creating something new, perhaps it's working on a new product or working with your team in some way. But we can also find that state of flow by letting go of the stress and moving away from that when it's stuff that we normally don't care to do. So just want to stop for a moment. Fiona, I cannot see my chat. Has anybody made any comments or anything? Or Laura? Nope. Okay. So I'm just going to talk about understanding stress from the inside out instead of the outside in. And what I mean by that is we often see stress as something from the outside of us. I personally used to see stress as my boss coming over to my desk. One of the things that I had dealt with in my own mind was the thought that he was going to come over and I was going to be fired. I was a contractor, and he would come to my desk and I would be like, this is it. I'm done. I've done something horrible. But these were just thoughts in my head, because every time he came to my desk, he wanted me to research something or fix a problem that had come up. And it took me a while to get out of my old thinking and realize that my boss had a level of trust with me, that he knew I could take care of it. And so he would come to me. I wasn't the only person. I'm not trying to praise myself, but he would come to me and say, look, this is something I need you to take a look at. And when I made that switch, it really changed my relationship with my boss. And that stress went away, and I was able to get a lot more done in that way. So where does stress come from? Our traditional view is that it's from the outside world, whether it's finances, or it's, like I mentioned, my boss, or it's the people who work for you, or it's there are delays in the projects, or the project is being done from somebody who wants to change the scope of the project and grow it when it's already been planned out and budgeted. It can come from family. right? We can see that as coming from family. The family is creating stress within us, whether it's a disagreement with children or spouses or parents or siblings, even friends can play into that. But I'm going to present the idea that stress doesn't actually come from outside of us. Sure, there are things outside of us that we can find stressful, but it's that finding it stressful that's actually different than the outside thing being stressful. So, what if stress just came from our thinking? That's just take a moment and consider that. I just shared a story about my thinking about my boss, like he was going to fire me and I was in the wrong somehow. Like I always imagined I had done something wrong. I always imagined it was my fault he was coming to my desk. Yet, never once did this guy come to my desk and tell me, you're fired or you screwed up. He always came to my desk and asked me to research something or look into fixing a problem that was going on in the organization. So to leave that stress trap behind, we need to understand how thinking works. So we are thinking beings, and thoughts are just thoughts. It's what we do. I have my little note down here, so I remember to tell this story, the Buddhist teacher story. Back in about 2008, I got introduced to a temple, a monastery, where I started going on a monthly basis and meditating. We would meditate for the whole weekend and do other things, but mostly meditate. And we would have an interview with the teacher. And my teacher, I was just so impressed. She had learned in Japan for 23 years, came to the United States and had been here 18 years running this temple. And in my interview, I was able to ask her any question I wanted. And I figured she knew the secret and I was missing it. And I sat down across from her and I said, when does my thinking stop? Like I'm sitting here, I'm doing all of this, I'm meditating, but I don't get a clear mind. And I wanted that more than anything because I knew that I was tired of my thinking, that my thinking was stressful in and of itself. And my teacher responded by laughing. And she laughed a really hearty laugh and sent me back to the meditation room where I got back on my cushion and thought, I don't get it. I don't know what the joke is here. It took me a long time after that, but one day it occurred to me that thoughts don't stop. We are thinking beings, and that her thoughts hadn't stopped. She hadn't found some secret to turn her mind off and be in this blissful, quiet state. It's just not something that happens. So thought also is a useful tool, but it's limited by what's stored in our brains. And you may have a memory of this, or sorry for tripping up. You may have a sense of how this works, knowing that you have as much knowledge as you do, and accessing that knowledge to solve problems or to direct people or to get a particular task done. Surely, if you're doing budgeting, you know how numbers work, and you can look at a budget and decide from there what to do. The same thing with any particular project in your area of expertise. You know the knowledge that you have, and you can work with that. But we also have thoughts that are stored in our brain that are negative. A lot of those thoughts we talked about that create the stress, the I'm not good enough type of thing. There's something's wrong with me. Why is this taking so long? I'm running to the end of my funds during this transition. So just go ahead and give some consideration to what your repetitive thoughts are. What are the thoughts that create stress for you? So this next section I call waking up to the unreality of thinking. And it's not that you don't have knowledge that's useful, right? Because like I mentioned, in terms of budgeting, in terms of projects, in terms of knowledge about technology, about working with people and all of that kind of stuff. That's absolutely useful, and you can call upon that pretty quickly. The unreality of thinking is when our thinking goes awry, when it's telling us something that's untrue, when it's creating that stress, when it's creating that feeling of, I need to fix this and I don't know how. So when you wake up to the unreality of thinking, stress falls away. You automatically return to this natural state of flow where you get access to these ideas and innovation. And you feel empowered. There's a big set of possibility. When we're out of stress, we get to have access to something I'm going to talk about in a little bit called wisdom. Maybe you've encountered something like that. I'm going to tell a little story about that with my friend Wyatt, who was able to let go of specific outcomes. So Wyatt worked in an investing firm, and his job was to kind of make a bet. If you've done any kind of investing, maybe you know what I'm talking about. And so he would do a bunch of research and decide one way or another whether it made sense to invest money in this particular stock, and then see what happened. I might not be explaining it well because I'm not in the investing world, but this is what I got from him. And so from there, he would watch what happened, and he would be really jumpy. I know enough about investing to know that when you invest in something, that you're investing for the long term. But Wyatt was watching the ups and downs of the market, as well as what was going on in the political sphere and in the newspapers and in any other information he could get. And he doubted himself all the time. And what happened was when he started to trust himself and get out of that stressful thinking, he could see clearly what his wisest decision would be in terms of the investment. Now, I'm not saying it works 100% of the time for him, but a lot of the time it did. And it got him enough experience to gain the respect of the people who owned his company. So letting go of those specific outcomes, it's going to be this way in this amount of time, or it's going to go up right now. And then having that disappointment when it would go down really helped him to stay the course on something that made sense when he had done all of the research. Another interesting thing that happened for Wyatt is as he grew in that job, he realized he wanted to be something else, that this wasn't the place for him. And he left the job and went and did an internship at another company. Now, I'm talking about an unpaid internship. He just said, I'm going. And he did this during the pandemic. And I spoke to Wyatt last fall. And at that moment that I talked to him, the company had hired him in to be his CFO. It was a startup. And so this excited him and created this possibility of what he could do within this company and how he could approach it. So just wanted to share that little story of how he let go of what might happen, what could happen, what the bad outcomes might be versus the good outcomes, and he just went with what he trusted himself to do. So when you let go of habitual thinking, I'm going to make this suggestion that your search for your next position becomes effortless. Now, I want to be really clear. I'm not saying you're going to kick back and not do anything, because that's not it. By effortless, I mean that when you let go of this habitual thinking, you move through what needs to be done with ease. You're not straining yourself. So a lot of times, and I've worked with people who are like this, and I'm not suggesting that everybody is, but when we get into a stressful position, we waste a lot of energy on that thinking part, on thinking about what might go wrong. And it can delay our progress, can delay your progress. So when you let go of that habitual thinking, the effortlessness is having let go of the habitual thinking. Now you can get into that state of flow as you're connecting with people, as you begin to send out more resumes, have different conversations, listen for other possibilities. So I want to back up just one moment and just ask you to consider popping into the chat if you like. I can't see the chat, so somebody will have to tell me if something's in there. And have you noticed yourself being in that state of flow, feeling like what you're doing is actually effortless, and what that experience might have been like for you? So I'm gonna go
Michael, you probably can maybe give a few seconds, see if anybody wants to pipe up.
Yeah, sure. Great, thank you.
Anybody want to add anything at this point before he continues? Any thoughts? Chris says, have been in flow many times while running lost. Did you say lost or long distance races, Chris? Was that intentional?
Well, no, it should have been long distance races. Yeah, that's the one time I've really been in flow where you just even stop thinking about everything and your breathing just takes over and the miles just fly by.
Totally agree, Chris.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a really good example of it. I think having been a runner myself, my experience was right up front, I would have a lot of thinking, but there would come a certain point where I was just running. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, I mean, you just get into I don't know if it's flow. I just call it the runner zone, where you're not even thinking. You just one foot's going in front of the next foot, and the next thing you know, you're at mile 16 and you're feeling great. And yeah, all that thinking goes away.
Mm-hmm. Right. Super.
Chris, I guess I have a similar but different approach. That's where I do heavy thinking. When I'm out there by myself and in the flow of the running, so I'm not even focused on the running part of it, but I'm doing all this problem solving and having internal conversations and conversations theoretically with other people that I'm anticipating speaking to soon. And so hashing it all out before I have the conversation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So Peter, let me just ask you about that. So when you've done that, and then you have the conversation, can you just kind of give a high level of how those conversations go?
Much better.
Yeah. Okay.
Because I've already rehearsed it and thought about it and anticipated reactions, and so therefore I'm prepared when I have, and sometimes the difficult conversations, but sometimes, as I said, the rehearsal, the thinking about it, it has certainly helped in the process. But as I said, when I go out on those runs, it just clears all the fog out of the way and helps me get zoned in on what's important. And, again, whether it's work or personal, family or whatever, that's what I love about, Chris, what you were saying about long distance running.
Yeah, that's great. I love that rehearsal and just being able to listen to yourself in that moment. Cool. Anyone else?
Mark, did you want to say anything? He had Mark Myers had a comment in there. I wasn't sure if you wanted to add on that.
Okay.
Sure. I put in the chat creative focus, which I can tell you where that phrase came from. Has something to do with somebody in this room. But anyway, creative focus encourages us to think outside the box, and to focus on what's next rather than what just happened. And I'm always focused. My favorite 4-letter word is next. And being a recovering accountant, I kind of have to get a little bit more creative and make sure I'm focusing on the right thing.
Okay, that's excellent. Yeah. I like that because, when we focus on the past, it's already gone. And that focus takes us away from any progress or how do we get the next thing done, and just taking that next step is absolutely perfect when you put your focus there. Great, thank you. Okay, so when you let go of habitual thinking, I probably just went over this. I think I might be repeating myself. Making genuine connections becomes enjoyable. And when we make a genuine connection, we're really able to listen. We're not prejudging or trying to think of what we're going to say next. Opportunity arises from unexpected places. If we're busy thinking about the stressful stuff, what's happening, what our emotions are, the problem that we need to somehow fix, it's hard to see opportunity because we're focused on fixing instead of receiving what's already there in front of us. And so many times we miss that opportunity. We show up from a more creative space. Creativity, I hear people say, well, I do my best creative work when I'm feeling stressed. And I would bet that they are misinterpreting that. I would bet that when they are doing their most creative work, they're misinterpreting the feeling they have in their body as some sort of stress, and that it's actually them being in the state of flow. So stress is not a foregone conclusion in any situation. We can actually practice being aware of what we're feeling and thinking, and then use our power of thought. A lot in the ways in which we just discussed with Mark and Chris and Peter. By rehearsing things, by listening to ourselves, by letting our brains shut down when we're out doing another enjoyable activity. One of the great things that happened for me is I was put in charge in 1997. This is one really good example of it, of solving a particular problem. And I got out the notebook and I got out the pencil and I locked myself in a room and I tore up a lot of paper and threw it in the trash. And at the end of about 3 days, I did not have any idea how I would solve this problem. Jumped in the car, started driving home, and I'm sitting at a stoplight when it came like a flash of lightning. And the next day I went in, got out the notebook, and was able to write out everything, all the steps that we needed to get done. So that's one way of using the power of thought, and I actually call that receiving wisdom. It comes from within us. It's accessible when we let go of feeling stressed about having to get something done, having to fix something, feeling like we have to produce something. When we let go of that, then our ability to produce something is often that point we get to, and it just comes. So I'm just going to stop for a moment here and ask if anybody has experienced anything similar to that. Okay, I'll move on.
Michael, this is Mark.
Yes.
There's one thought that comes to mind. It's one of the things I teach and I read through the Dale Carnegie book, How to Win Friends and Influence People, is stress is not something that will go away, but it is something that we can put in perspective and
yes.
face it. is different. It doesn't go away. It might can be reduced, but it doesn't go away. So how we look at it is in our control. So I like the idea of putting it in perspective rather than trying to manage it or make it go away.
That's absolutely excellent. And just to add on to that, when we stop trying to fix the stress, it shifts all on its own. It doesn't become such a problem, and that different perspective shows up. Does that make sense? Oh, Mark, I was asking if that made sense to you.
Sorry, I used a little icon, thumbs up. Absolutely.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I have my screen share is all that I can see right at the moment. So
yeah, sorry about that.
Yeah, I can't see the icon, so that's okay.
You mentioned that a moment ago.
You didn't know.
You mentioned that a moment ago. I should have remembered that. So sorry.
No worries. No worries at all. Okay, so some facts about thoughts. So thoughts are not personal. Most of our thoughts are habitual, repetitive, stored in our brains. Newer thoughts are not, but they're just not personal. So if you, we talked a bit about all of those stressors at the beginning, and if you have that thought, well, there's something wrong with me, it's just a thought, it's not personal. Judgments about ourselves just aren't personal. We're human beings, and as human beings, we're thinking beings. It's what we do. It's what our brains were designed for. And so thinking happens just all the time. There are times when thought will shut down, but it doesn't happen by making it happen or trying to get it to happen. It's when we stop trying. So like when you're in the example of running the marathon, that's a place where after some point, you're just running. Or when you're rehearsing, there's thought going on, but it's not the same kind of thought. It's not the same level of thought. It becomes much more useful kind of thought where wisdom will show up in identifying those different scenarios about difficult conversations, things that need to be done. And again, wisdom can show up. How am I going to handle this? What's the best approach here? And you get that hit, if you will, of knowledge, of inspiration or insight. So most thoughts are repetitive. I can tell you, I thought the same stuff over and over again. And if you want to share just for a moment a particular repetitive thought that you've had, it can be anything from stressful to silly. I have all of that kind of stuff going on in my head all the time. And so if you want to go ahead and share something about that, that would be good. So while that's going on, thoughts are actually the precursor to having a feeling or an emotion. But it's fast. The thought is like lightning fast. And I know you know this, but whenever we're feeling something, there's usually some sort of a thought behind it. But we may not even be aware of what the thought was. So an emotion or a feeling gives you insight into the level of what you're thinking is right now. So if you're in a lot of what I call the lower level emotions, the stress emotions, anger, sadness, depression, guilt, shame, any of those things that all humans experience, there's a thought behind it or a story behind it that has created that. In creating that, we have an opportunity to take a look at what it is. a lot of times people will ask, well, why do I feel this way? And so you can see what the thinking is. You can see what the story is that's been playing in your mind. And oftentimes it's a repetitive thing. It's something that's been going on all of our lives. And we carry that into our work. What that amygdala does, or what they call the reptilian brain does, it's always on alert for danger, right? And it takes those old stories that created that emotional distress and applies it to new situations. Oh yeah, that looks like this thing that happened in the past. And so I'm going to go ahead and feel this way because that's what the program that runs in my brain says. And it can manifest itself in the body. You'll feel it. So thinking, of course, is useful when used for a purpose. So Peter's example of when he's running and he's thinking about a difficult situation or conversation, then he uses that time to come up with a strategy or a plan on how to approach it. Think about what the other person's responses are going to be. And I would even go so far as to say that at that moment, he has access to wisdom as a potential solution. And even that thinking about what the next step is, that's accessing wisdom. Just receiving from within yourself that thought of, oh, okay, this is what we need to do next. So habitual thought is just a representation of how you view the world. Now, I want you to take that with a bit of a grain of salt, because habitual thought isn't really how you view the world. It's just often that we think that's how we view the world. So if we have a negative sense of the world, then there's a habitual set of thinking that creates that negative sense of the world. If we have a generally positive outlook on the world, on the business, on what we need to go do or get done today, then that's the representation of the world that we have. And we can choose the one that's useful. But it's often not the truth. It's really just perception, right? It's how we decide we want to approach and view things, whether we want to be stuck in a negative space or we want to open up, be aware of what our thinking is, allow it to correct itself and move into that positive space. Well, one of the things that I find a lot of people deal with in these situations where they've been transitioning for a long time or things just don't seem to be moving as quickly as they want is that they will not think about past successes. It's kind of human nature to think about past failures. And so it's useful to think in terms of, what have my successes been? And is there a reason? No, of course, the answer is going to be no here, that I can't actually be that successful again. You haven't become a different person. So yes, the answer is yes, you can become or be that successful person again and continue to be that. So some of you might be asking, well, how do I do this? And the answer is to observe your thinking. And I've learned a lot of interesting techniques over the years, everything from tapping on acupressure points to hypnosis, to something called tapas acupressure technique, which it all sounds quite a bit woo-woo, if you will. All of it's been very useful in terms of how those techniques have helped people. What I'm going to suggest here is that just by observing your thinking, without a technique, without doing something special or reaching for something outside of you, that you absolutely already have the ability to change the way you're feeling in this moment, so that stress doesn't have to be a problem. I think Mark had said stress doesn't ever really go away. And it's true, because we're always capable of thinking those old thoughts again. But we're also capable of recognizing that, of observing it and watching it shift. The more you observe your thinking, the quicker that shift happens. So whatever you're feeling, like I said a moment ago, indicates the level of thinking in the moment. And, sorry for these slides here, as you observe your thinking, wisdom arises and thinking self-corrects. Just let that soak in for just a minute, because wisdom, it's funny, I remember thinking that old people were wise when I was growing up, right? We gain wisdom as we get older. But the truth about it is that we can have access to wisdom at any age. So even if you think you haven't gotten to whatever age it is that you should be wiser, the truth is that you already have access to it just by noticing what your thinking is, noticing how you're feeling, and then listening. And in that listening, the thinking self-corrects and you become open to hearing your own inner wisdom. So as your thinking changes, you have access to the state of flow. When we're in stress, it's difficult to access the state of flow, because now we're in a place where the cortisol levels are high, the blood flow has been taken away from our frontal lobes, or where we're thinking, and from other organs in the body, and sent to where we're in this fight or flight. Am I going to have to fight something or run away? When we observe our thinking, listen, that state of flow returns, and you have access to it, as well as effortless manifestation. Now, I use this term as a useful term, okay? Because I know people talk about manifesting and the law of attraction, and this is not what I'm talking about. If you ever saw The Secret way back when, or heard about it, and people were like, yep, I just got to sit on my couch and I'm going to win $1 million, or everything's going to come to me. When we are going to do something, or we have a goal in mind, we're going to take an action toward it. And that action is essentially the oil that greases the gears that gets things moving. And we become then in that state of flow, and we accomplish what we need to do. And that's what I mean by manifestation. You have access to wisdom or new ideas, things that you wouldn't have thought of before show up. And that's super powerful in terms of being in the COO position, being in any position, in any organization. When you have wisdom and you can share that or implement that, that's where the quote unquote magic happens. And creativity. Being in a stressful place, I mentioned this earlier, is not a place of creativity. It's not a place where wisdom shows up, or effortless manifestation, or the state of flow. So, yeah, that's it. I thought I had a story. It disappeared. Maybe it'll come back in a moment. And then accelerated learning. So that accelerated learning just means that when you're in that state of flow, when you're not feeling stressed, you're able to take in information and assimilate it in a much quicker way, and make it useful in a much quicker way, in a shorter amount of time. Okay, so the conclusion. Habitual thinking creates a stress response in the body and impedes progress, impedes creativity, doesn't allow for being in the state of flow. You have access to universal wisdom by simply listening or observing your thinking and allowing it to shift on its own. The more you do this, the quicker it happens. And from that place, universal wisdom arises, guiding you toward your next step effortlessly. So when we talked about focusing on the next step instead of the past, that's a good example of what that is, where that universal wisdom shows up. Okay, so I have about 10 till. So wasn't sure I was going to make it, but we have some time for some questions or comments.
Can make a comment. It's kind of silly, but I can tell you how I've been trying to deal with those thoughts that disrupt rather than encourage. And I've tried to meditate so many times. I even have this device that I bought. It goes on my head. But what I am trying to do is I literally, like, as I'm sitting there trying to meditate, if a thought comes to my head that is disruptive that I want to put to the side for the time being, I mean, I literally go like this and pretend like I'm grabbing the thought like a bone out of my head. And then I put it down on the ground and then I step on it and I say, I know I need to deal with you later, but I'm putting you to the bottom of the list, right? So you're going down to the bottom of my heel and you'll get up here again at some point, but right now it's time for you to go away. So again, kind of embarrassing, but that's how I'm doing it and it seems to be working relatively.
I love that. I love that. I've actually done similar things. I have a buddy, he and I have talked about that kind of stuff extensively where, you know, we've talked about, well, here's a problem and we will make a motion like this, like here it is in front of us and push it behind us. So it's not, I don't think it's silly at all because it works. So, you know, and that's a lot of what that is about when you've got something that you need to deal with that's stressful, but it's not the thing that needs to be dealt with right at the moment, and moving that out of the way and then coming back to that state of like, okay, I can focus on this now. Great, thank you.
Anybody else have any tips for how they deal with it? Did you want to add anything else, Michael? Any other?
Yeah, just that, you know, I want to encourage everybody just to give this a try, just to, when you notice that you're feeling stressed, and that's like a big step, like, oh, there it is. Then you can start observing or listening to what the thinking is, what's going on. And in doing that as a practice, you're just, like I've been saying, you're going to have access to a shift in your thinking. It's going to occur naturally. You don't actually need to fix it, because when you step back and just listen and notice, it shifts on its own.
Michael, I'd like your thoughts on an idea, something I've been reading about over the last few years. I put a comment related to it in chat, which I know you wouldn't have seen, but I love the idea that you proposed to us around observing our thinking. And observing our thinking, I look at it another way, an additional way, and that is to pay attention to what I'm feeling. Sometimes my feelings are much more reliable than my thinking, not because I don't think good thoughts or I'm not a smart person or all that, but sometimes my feelings are exactly, they don't lie to me. My thinking can sometimes be distorted by me not seeing or observing them properly, or observing the world properly. Where do you draw the line between observing our thinking versus looking at our feelings?
Yeah, this is actually a good question. I think feelings are really reliable in that they give us a window into the level of thinking that's going on.
Yep.
So, and when I'm talking about observing, you can certainly observe a feeling. And that's actually another way to approach that.
Mhm.
And often I've practiced this. When you observe a feeling, and I'm kind of putting my hands out in front of me as though here it is right here, wherever you're feeling it in your head, your body, it will shift. And as it shifts, so does your thinking. You can also look at it as, okay, I've got this feeling and it's telling me something about my level of feeling or thinking. When you look at that, you can see what those thoughts are. And now you have a window also into what the truth is, whether that's true or not is what I mean. And that wisdom that I'm talking about will intuitively let you know, yeah, that's not true. Or, you know what? I have a bad feeling about this. I should listen to it. It's like the gut feeling, you know, and then, and it can happen with other people. You know, if you're interviewing somebody and your gut feeling is something wrong here, absolutely listen to that. That's a piece of information that is valuable. And the same thing can happen. Oh, go ahead.
People at least say if my feeling, if something doesn't smell right, there's a good chance something actually stinks. And so that's kind of a silly way of looking at it, but it at least forces me to sit back and look and do the observation exercise that you suggested. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. No, so I think you're spot on with that.
Hey, Michael, I was just going to offer that, you know, the whole search process can be a bit of a roller coaster. You have good days, bad days, ups and downs. And, you know, when you're doing the outreach phone calls and things like that, sometimes, you know, you hit it right. And sometimes you get off a call and say, oh, that just wasn't right, you know, or, you know, it just didn't go well. So I always try to do circuit breakers, I'll call it, where I'm like, all right, you got to change the environment, you know, maybe grab the dog, go for a walk, just get into a new pattern, you know, disconnect what wasn't going well, get some fresh air, and then come back to it fresh and start over again.
That's also perfect. I can't tell you how many times just walking away allows your thinking to switch, your feeling to switch. And when you come back, you have a new idea or you have a fresher perspective.
Yeah.
And you can jump back into it.
Yeah, just intuitively, you know, all right, if it happens to be a low moment, it's not going to stay that way. It's always going to change, right?
That's right, because it won't. And, you know, everybody here has had enough experience now to know, yeah, I'm feeling low right now. And maybe I have some thinking, so it'll change. Yeah. Because I know, you know, when I go home, I'm going to see, you know, my spouse or my kids or my dog. And my mood's going to change because I think differently about that situation.
Yeah, that was good, Peter. I'm glad we ended on that because it's a very good point of probably where we all are right now. And I do it often, the stepping away. But Michael, thank you so much for joining us today and thoughtfully walking us through that, or I said flowing through that, because I think that's kind of what you did for us. Next week, we have Catherine King and Paul Herrerius, are both search executives that'll be coming back with us next week. They met with us in the beginning of this whole transition effort back in September, October, I think, and they're going to revise their presentation and come back. It was a good one. Janice Litvin, who's on with us today, she'll be back. She'll be with us toward the end of April, so looking forward to that. And then we have a surprise guest, Rich Horan, who's our Sacramento chapter director. He's coming up with a fun topic. He threw 3 at me. They're all great, so we might have to have him come back even later into the summer to bring back another one of them. One talking about how the search is a marathon and talking about the steps. And Chris, you should probably team up with him. I might actually recommend that to him because that would be a good match. But anyway, thank you all for being here. And next Tuesday, we'll be here same time again. And hopefully we'll have Bill with us. But enjoy the rest of your week and stay strong.
Thank you.
Thanks, Laura.
Thank
Take
you.
care.